Yeah, so based on where we stopped last time, we discussed we discussed about the authentication slash authorization system. Then in this case, in today's lecture, I'm going to take you guys based on how um, what goes on between getting and requesting a ride. So let's move on first of all to this particular student page here. So right now, this particular page for the students is actually built with React. So all this stuff you are seeing here are called component. Each of these thing, each of this each of this which you are seeing here, each of this block of code you are seeing right here is actually called component. I don't know why this isn't shown. So let me just take this off. So each of these parts you are seeing here, not that, sorry. Each of this block you are seeing here are called components in React, and that's what makes React a really good library for JavaScript. So if you're wondering what React is actually a JavaScript library meant for building reusable UI components. So as you can see in this particular piece here, this navbar is being used in different pages of this particular site here. So instead of us copying and pasting the navbar, we can simply write this particular code once and call it in whatever page we want to. And each of this particular stuff to also called components. So I'm going to just leave that for now. But what I want to focus more on is actually what makes possible what goes behind the scene of requesting a ride from both the student and the driver. So let's move on to the rides page. So something is wrong. Okay. Let me go into the server side. I don't know, something's wrong with this editor. Let me just close this down. Okay, so we are this particular side now. So I want to discuss with you about sockets or WebSocket. So WebSocket, like what I discussed last time, is a way of transmitting data to and fro from both the client and the server in a real-time fashion manner. So the client and both the server makes use of WebSocket. So each time the students request a particular ride, this information is being sent into the server, and the server is able to handle that via WebSocket API using socket.io. So I want to show you how this code here. This is the main code for the this is actually the main code in the server here, which enables the server handles WebSocket connection. So right here I'm declaring a class having a name of socket, and I'm giving it a constructor which is the IO instance from socket.io here. So let's look at this. Based on this here, let me look at this. Based on, let's look at this. I'm actually exporting this out into this particular file here. So, like I said before, this particular app is actually the root component. Sorry, not the root component, but these are the roots to our server here. So app.js is actually the root file to every other functionality within this server side code here. So right now I'm importing socket.io in our app.js file, and I'm destructuring the socket instance from socket.io, which enables the server handles different concurrent requests coming from both the client and the server. And I'm also getting out this particular socket. Right now you are seeing this socket here. This is different from socket.io here. Socket.io is actually the library itself. Why socket? This particular socket class here is actually coming from this socket API.js file here. So since I'm exporting this particular class instance, I'm actually calling it from this particular file, then this declaring an object, then passing IO as the instance, then calling the main socket connection. So right now, what this particular file does is that once this page loads up, it shows it executes the socket IO connection here using this main socket connection method here. And what this does is that we can simply check when a particular connection is coming in from the client. Right now, once the page loads from the client sends a socket connection into this particular server route, and we can actually tell when a connection has reached the server. Then once a connection has reached the server, we can then create some logic based on if the client is connected or not. And let me just show you an instance. I'm going to put console.log here. Client connected. I'm going to open the terminal now. Right now, you won't see anything here. But let me refresh the page. Once I refresh this page, as you can see, it says what? Client connected. But what goes on behind the scene of both the server and the client? Well, let's look at what the client app is. The client app here. So right now, within the client here, I'm actually declaring a socket instance also, just as I did from the server itself inside this particular file here. So within this file, I'm importing socket IO client. This socket IO client is different from socket.io. This is an instance for the client, while socket.io is an instance for this server. So the one which you saw here is actually being used for the server. This particular library is actually used for the backend of the server, while socket.io, as name implies, is actually used for the client. So I'm simply destroying IO from this particular socket IO client, which enables me make connections or emit events from the client to this server. So now let's look at this. Let's look at how this is possible. So the way WebSocket works is that WebSocket emits different events based on the domain of whatever web app you are trying to run. So right now, the domain for our server is at http:// localhost 5000. This is actually the port in which the server is listening to. So we need to actually put our server ports here, just as we did to make an API request to our server. But for socket, we need to provide this in order for the client to make or emit events from both the client and the server. And once we do this, we simply listen for a connection event here. And once there's a connection event here, and this particular connect here is actually coming from the server. So let me show you how this works here. So right now, let's move into this socket IO API class. So right now, let's look at this. Let me close down this particular files here, since we are not working with them. So once we declare this particular main method from this class here, we simply emit an event to the client here. We simply emit different events to the clients here. So the way we emit events to the clients is by using the IO instance followed by the emit method. The emit method is what actually helps us in emitting a particular event to the client. So when we look at this right here, we're simply listening for the events sent from the server to the client here. So once we do all this, we then save the data coming in from the client coming in from the server to the client, and we then save those data within the browser local storage in order for me to make use of it later on. So each time the client makes connection to the socket, the first time it loads, it sends a particular data, which is actually a key within the socket instance here. So one of the key name is the ID of the socket connection. So each socket connections has a unique random generated ID, and that's how we can be able to tell where if this particular socket is coming, if actually this particular event is coming in from a user. So we simply get that particular we simply get the data, which in this case is actually the socket ID. Then we simply save it for reference later on. And if you want to see where this is actually being saved, this is actually being saved in the browser local storage. So if I come into application, then I move into the local storage, followed by the client's name here. We can simply see this socket's name here, which was declared here. So we simply save this particular connection. So once the user simply logs in, we send a connection to the server, and the server sends an event to the client. Once the event reaches the client, we simply save extra data coming in from this server, and the server has the server simply sends one data, which is the ID which was used from the client to make connection to it. Then we extra the ID coming in from the server, and we simply save it into the local storage, so we can be able to identify where this particular connection is coming from later on in our code. And if you want to see where this particular stuff is being used, I will show you guys later on. So if I go into let's look at right. Okay, I'm going to come to this later on. So let's look at how we are able to listen for connection from both the client and the server. So once this is actually the main. This is what you need to do once you simply make an instance from the socket client. From the socket library, which is found in this server here. So we simply listen for a particular event. The particular event is known as connection here. And we can get that event based on this on method here. The on method is actually used in listening for events emitted from whatever source. So in this case, this connection is coming in from the client here. So once we get this connection here, we can also do any of our logic here. So let's look at this right now. Let's look at this particular event. Student ride request. So let's look at this. Where is this particular stuff coming in from? Where is this event coming in from? So this particular event is coming in from the client here. So each time we simply make a request from the client to the server, this particular app, the client here sends an event to the server's WebSocket connection, and we can get that event based on the socket.on method, which I said earlier, which is being used for listening for an event from both the client and the server. So to see where this particular stuff is coming from, let's move into our React app here. So let's look at this button here. Let's look at this. Where is the button? This is the button here. This particular success button is coming in from this one. This is get it right here. Just as you see here, get it right. This is actually the text which is being shown here. So when we click on this button, when we click on this particular button, it makes it we're able to make different logic based on. We're able to create logic which is going to run as a result of this particular click event, and we are declaring that logic based on the events applied to this place here. So once we click on this button, the event which is being called is called onClick, and in JavaScript to listen for a click event, we make use of either the onClick method or simply the add event listener. The add event listener, we can simply apply the onClick method within it. So we are saying, hey, once we click on this button here, what should we do? Simply, once we click on this button, we simply want to run this particular code here, this function. We want to run this function here. So let's look at it. Let's look at it right here. So once you click on this button, you want to run this handle gets right function. Where is this function coming in from? Well, it's actually declared up here. This is the function here, right here. So whatever codes which is being declared here would get executed as soon as this particular button gets clicked. So let's look at this. So when we click on this button, we want to do different stuff. First of all, we want to validate the input fields here, because we don't want the student or the user to send an empty data to the server. And let me tell you what I mean. So let's say we actually click on this here. Let me refresh this. We click on this button here. If the student tries to send an empty location or an empty input field, we simply want to do something. We want to throw an error to the user saying field can't be empty. So how this works is that once these two fields are empty, this particular code gets executed here. So once they click on this button and these two fields are empty, we simply throw an error using the notification tools library here. So let's look at this right here. So once we click on this button now, we want to throw an error to the user saying what fields can't be empty. And this will prevent them from sending in an empty field here. So let's look at this. Once we click on this, it says what fields can be empty. This will actually prevent the user from trying to enter an empty location address. So otherwise, if the field isn't empty, we simply want to declare we want to call this the loading method as true, which means this particular event has already fired. So let's look at this. We simply set the loading here, and this set loading is actually coming from the state declared up here. So this is actually this particular variable here. This is actually a variable name, and this is the function which is used in updating the state. First of all, in React, we declare the state using the useState hook. Then, to update the state, we make use of a particular function that starts with set, followed by the name of the update we really want to make to that variable. So let's say once a particular button is being clicked, we want to change the number from 1 to 2. We can simply make use of the function here. So what you see here in the left hand side is actually a variable name, while what you see on the right hand side is actually called a function which is being used to update the states right here in React. So I don't know if you guys understand that, but if you don't understand that, I'm going to leave some reference to you guys here. So let's look at how this works. So when we click on this button here, we want to set loading to true, which means the user or the student has make request to this server, and the server is and the client is wanting to get the data from. So instead of you leaving in just the UI like this, we want to show some interaction within this field here. So once you enter some locations here and you click on get it right, it simply shows a loading animation, which means that the request has been sent to this server and the client is waiting for some data or some event to be made back from the server. So that's why we are simply setting our loading to true. And what we did there, it says what? It said get client socket ID. We simply want to get the socket ID in order for we to tell who owns this particular connection coming in from the client. So that was the reason why I was storing the client ID here, which is this. So each time the user will refresh the page, a unique generated socket ID is being generated in order for we to tell who or who this particular identity belongs to. So we simply check. So what we're doing right now, we're simply checking if local storage does get item socket is equal to null or undefined, which means if this data isn't available, we want to reload the entire page once this button is being clicked. So if we click on this button and this data isn't available, right? We want to reload the page, and once we reload the page, this particular data would be set automatically from another code, from another piece of logic within this application here. So if else, we simply, if this particular stuff isn't true or returns false, which means this data here exists, then we want to extract that particular socket ID from the browser local storage. That was the reason why we kind of do this. So right now you're asking, why do we need to declare this method JSON.pass? Like I said, anything stored within the browser is stored as a string. We can't just simply send string to this server. We need to send it in a valid data which the server can actually read through. So one of the data which is server can read through is actually called JSON or XML. So when I copy this code like this, when I do this, right now you actually see that this is actually surrounded by a string, and you can't really tell, because this, you can't really tell if this is actually an object or not. But as programmer, this particular stuff won't, if this particular data is an object, the browser will surely formatted it into an object. Like, so let me show you what I mean. So if I declare this like this, if I write this same stuff like this, and watch how the browser format it. Right now you can see that this is actually clickable, which means that this piece of data is an object, right? This is a string, because we can't really click on it. Nothing can happen. If this actually doesn't get you confusing enough, let's try another method. Let's try checking the type inference for this particular data. So let's say console.log type of, then we copy this piece of data out, check it. Then let's actually check it out. Right now, as I see here, this is actually a string. So we can't actually send a string to the server. We need to format it into an object or a JSON format for we to send this particular piece of data to the server. So the only way we can do this is by making use of a JavaScript object called JSON. So the JSON object here enables us to format a piece of data here. To convert a string to an object, we make use of JSON.pass. Why? To convert an object to a string, we make use of what? JSON.stringify. So to convert this piece of data into an object, we simply call this JSON.pass followed by the data we want to convert. So we want to convert this into an object here. So right now we've actually converted it into a valid object here. So in this way we can simply get this particular key name here, because right now if we simply do this, we can actually access the key name, and the key name right here is what? Socket ID. So let's try extracting this from this, and let's see what the browser does. What do you see? It says what? Undefined. Because why? This piece of data is actually in a string format. We can only extract data from this if this piece of data is a valid JavaScript object. So let me show you what I mean. Right now, if I do this socket ID, that's the key name here. What is it actually gives us the value here. So in this way we can actually extract some piece of information from an object but not from a string. Okay, I hope you guys understand that a lot. So let's move on. Then we simply create the data which we want to send to this server, which is we want to get the from, the user ID who sends the message, sorry, the event or the piece of data, the role, and the socket ID. This is actually the data we want to send to this server using WebSocket here. So when this from is coming on, from this piece of data. So this is actually the from. here, and this is actually the tool. So they're coming in from the pickup input and the drop input here, and we can actually, this is actually a valid JavaScript object here. So we can simply emit, send this piece of data to our socket connection, which is actually listening on in this server. So instead of making an API request, we can simply send this piece of data to the server using WebSocket, and WebSocket actually allows us, or sorry, the socket IO client allows us to emit some piece of information using the emit method here. The emit method is actually used in sending data to the client here. So I want to state this right here. The emit method is being used to do what? To transfer data to a WebSocket client. Why the on method here? When you see the on method here, the on method is being used for listening for a server, sorry, for a WebSocket connection here. The emit method here is being used to do what? To transfer or to emit a piece of data to the client, to the WebSocket on the background. But why the on method here is being used as what? To listen for a particular WebSocket event coming in from the client. So sorry, coming in from this server itself. So let's clear all this. So, and we can simply send this particular connection, sorry, this piece of data, I keep saying connection, rather this piece of data to our WebSocket, server here. So we send this data, but how do we get the data from our server? Well, we can go into our server now. Right now, we are sending an event called student write request. We are sending an event called student write request, and we can catch this event in our server using the on method here. So right now we are simply saying was socket.on this particular event which was sent from the server itself. So we are simply saying when there is a connection, or sorry, when there's an event coming in from the client, this particular event, what do we want to do with this event? First of all, we want to get the data coming in from the client itself based on this particular event, and the only way we can get the data, this particular socket.on method provides us with a callback function. The callback function gets executed as soon as this particular piece of events reaches the server here. So the callback function has a parameter called data. The data is what is actually coming in from the client. By the way, you can call the placeholder whatever name you want. You could even call this Peter, but since we want to make our code more readable enough for others, it's actually good for we to give it a specific and useful name itself, so others, when they see it, they can actually understand this. So we are getting this particular event coming in from the server, coming in from the client rather, and then the callback function, like I said before, it's actually get executed once this event reaches here. So the callback function has a data parameter which is actually meant for receiving the data coming in from the client here. So we simply destructure the data coming in from the client here, coming in from this client data, and the data is actually what we are sending from the client right here. So this is the piece of data we are getting from the client. So don't look at this as weird. This is weird. Rather, we are sending this from the client, and then we also get those data from the server here. So what do we want to do with those data? First of all, actually, I want to show you guys what the data looks like. So let's go into our terminal. Right now, I'm logging out the piece of data coming in from the client here. So let's look at this. So when I click on this link here, I should get Nelson Mandela and cafeteria here. So let's look at this. First of all, let me save this. So just look at this terminal here. Once I click get it right, sorry, let me refresh this. Cafeteria here, then whatever we want here. So we should get cafeteria and let's see Mandela Hall here. So let's click on get it right. What do you guys see? We see what? This data coming in from where? from the client. This is actually a piece of the data coming from the client. So we have the from, which is actually this here, the from here. We have the to, which is this here. Then we have the user ID, which this particular user ID is actually the user or the student which is logged in on this server here. Also on the client. Why the role is actually the role of the user, which in this case is actually students, because we don't want to allow driver to make requests to drivers. We want to allow students to make requests or to get a ride from driver, and then we simply send the socket ID here. The socket ID is coming in from the one which we stored up here. Let's look at where that's coming from. So this is what this stuff is actually coming from the browser here. So we are sending in a socket ID so that the server can know which particular user owns this event here. So what do we do with this data? Do we just leave it like that? No, we simply handle the data. So right now we are getting in the user ID, but first of all we want to check if actually that user ID and the role matches with what we have in the database, because we don't allow this known to or any sort of malicious user to send in an invalid data coming in from the client through an API. So we simply validate the request. We simply check. We simply select. We make use of a SQL query called select all from users table, where ID is equals to this placeholder here, and user role is actually this placeholder. This placeholder is actually this here. Sorry, this. Why this is actually this here. So we're simply saying, hey you, I want the database to give me data based on the user ID and the user role coming in from the client here. So we simply check if there's an error. If there's an error, we want to throw the error to the client here. If there's no error, we want to check if actually that student exists within our database. If they don't exist, we want to throw this error to them here, which is write request field. User with that data ID doesn't exist. Else, if the user exists, we want to check for drivers online, because we don't want to send some requests to the drivers when they're not actually online here. So let me show you what that means. First of all, I'm going to come into the driver's page. So this is actually the driver's page. So as you can see, this is different from this. This is actually different from this. So this is the student page here, and this is the driver's page here. This is actually used to toggle the driver visibility, which is either offline or online. So right now the driver is what online. So each time we make a socket connection here, we simply send those requests to an online driver, not offline driver here. So right now, let me just reload this. Let me reload this. I'll call this. Then we send the request. As you can see, it does what the request reaches the driver, and the socket connection is actually counting down based on whether the driver accept or reject the request. Right now, it says what no driver found, no driver what responded. I'm going to explain that to you later based on the logic of our code. But if actually this driver is offline right now, this won't reach any user here. As you can see, what no connection or no event was sent to the driver, because why? The driver was actually what offline here. So let's just reload this page right here and reload this. So let's move on. So we simply select all from users table, where the user role is what 1 and the status is what 2. So we want to get a status, and by the way, this status and user role is actually declared in our table found in our database here. So let's look at that right here. So if I do /d users table, so this should be smaller like this. So right now you can see that what the user role is present here and the what status is present here. So if I simply do all this, I'm simply saying, hey, I want this particular piece of code to check where the user role is what driver and the status is what on here. So these are the two values I'm checking for within our database here, because I don't want to check for an offline driver either. Rather, sorry, I want to check for a driver which are online based on their status in our database here. So I'm still checking for their role and their status here. So if there's an error, I simply throw out the error to the user. Else, I simply do what? I simply if right now I'm declaring some piece of variable right there, but I will get back to this. But simply I'm checking if the driver is available. If the driver is not available, I simply emit an event saying no driver. This particular event is called no driver, and I'm emitting this piece of data. The piece of data is actually an object containing a key called message and a value called no driver found. So let me show you this. Let's look at this. Once I click on this, let's look at this first. Let's watch this for some minutes and see what happens. Oh, sorry, the driver wasn't online, rather. So let me just refresh this. So let me just turn this particular driver to be online. And by the way, if something didn't work within this piece of code, I need you guys to what? Refresh the page in order for everything to be set back, because sometimes WebSockets are stateless. So you need to refresh the page for a piece of information to be set back to it. So let me just simply call this. Let me do this. I'm gonna send a piece of request right now. If the driver doesn't respond, an event is being fired from the server to the client here. So what this is, what? No driver responded, which means what? No driver actually responded to the message here. So that was the reason why I did all this. This would actually get executed if actually no driver was found. So what I did earlier was to send some piece of data, and the piece of data I'm sending on is actually, if the driver was actually found, I want to emit this data. Number one, the client data, which the client sent, and number two, the user's information, which is their image, their role, and their ID. So these are the piece of data I want to emit back to that specific user. And by the way, I'm not making use of just emit right there. I'm making use of broadcast. So when you see a code here called socket.broadcast.emit, I'm simply saying, hey you, I want you to emit this piece of event to the driver, but not to the client who sent the request. I'll go again over it. Let's look at this. Once you click on this button here, you simply send a request to the what? Server. This server gets the data or the event. The socket in turn sends the data back to the client. But I don't want to send this piece of the data to the client. Instead, I want to send this piece of data to every other drivers except the particular client who sends the request. Let me go again. Once the request is coming in from the client to the server gets the data, it processes it, it does some sort of logic behind this thing. Then it emits an event, a WebSocket event, to every other drivers except the client who make the request using socket.broadcast. So the broadcast method simply tells the piece of code here to send this particular event to every other users that are connected to this socket except the one who makes the request, which in our case is actually this particular piece of user. So hope you guys get that. Then I'm simply transferring this data to the client. Else, if an error occurs, I simply want to do what? Guess the error and do all sort of stuff with it. So that's what I'm doing right here. Then how do we process the data from our client? Let's look at our client. Right here, you won't see that piece of event here, because the piece of that particular event, which is this, we are sending in an event called users request. The users what request. So let's find where this piece of event is. So I want to go into my search tab and search for users request. So let's look at this. Right now it's actually in our profile.js. So the profile.js contains this particular event here. So this particular socket event. So and it's actually found in our driver's page, not the user's page. So this will actually get executed as soon as this page gets loaded. And as you can see, I'm wrapping it in a use effect, in a React use effect function here. So this use effect gets executed as soon as the page mounts, which means as soon as the page is being painted on the screen here, that which is this in our case. As soon as this particular piece of component gets rendered in our browser, we want to listen for that event here. So right here, I'm simply saying, hey, if there is an event called users request, I want to simply get those data. Then when I get those data, I need to update some states within this particular page here. I'm updating the from, the to, the image, the socket ID, the incoming student IDs, the incoming student role, and these are all declared up here. So these are the state which is being declared when this particular page get loaded. So right here, I'm simply doing all this as soon as the request reaches here. But if all this data are being appended, what do we do next? If all this data are being updated using the sets and whatever name, what do we do with those data? Well, we simply display a timer. What do we do next? Not display a timer. We simply we simply make some requests to our server to get the user's information. To do what? To get the user's information. So right here, I'm simply I'm simply making a request, an API request to our not an API request. Sorry about that. I'm simply making an AJAX call to our server using a library called Axios. I could actually make use of fetch of the browser fetch function, but I just decided to make some things easier. So I'm making a post request to the server, which based on this particular API URL here. So I'm sending the request, and what am I sending? I'm sending a piece of data to the server, and the piece of the data contains the user ID, who makes the request. That is who sends the right request and the role of the user. I'm sending this piece of data. As soon as the piece of data reaches the server, some piece of logic gets executed, and let's see what actually goes on behind the scenes. So let's look at this. Let's go into let's look at profiles. So let's look at user's profile. Okay, yeah, this is it here. So I'm getting the user ID, the role, and the what user ID. I'm simply validating the request. I'm simply validating if actually those values are provided. If they're not provided, I'm sending this piece of error to the user saying what empty fields required role and user ID. Else, I want to, if those data are actually provided by the client, else I want to check if the user ID is available in our database, and I simply do that using an SQL query called select and whatever all this stuff is. So I'm simply selecting name. I'm selecting the data I want from database based on what the user ID and the role. So I'm saying, hey, you give me data for this specific user based on the user ID and the role in the database. So if no information was found, I simply throw an error to the client from the server saying what user with that ID or and role doesn't exist, enough for me not to do the wrong thing. Else, if those data are available, I'm sending them those pieces of data to the client here. So let me go again. If those data are available, I simply do what? Send them to the client. If they're not available, I don't want to send the client an empty piece of data. Instead, I want to send an error to the client saying what? User with that ID and role doesn't exist. So let's see how we handle all this within the client. So how do we do all this? First of all, when we make a promise-based request, by the way, promise in JavaScript simply means an event which is meant to either fail or succeed. So the probability of this particular event getting failed is either 1 or 0, and the probability of this particular event or this request getting succeeded or successful is either 1 or 0. So this axis here makes use of Ajax and a promise-based utility behind the scene in order for we to make asynchronous request to our server. So simply, I'm checking if there's a data, I'm setting this loading state to false, and I want to update the user's info based on that data sent from the server. And once the data sent from the server is available, I want to display them on the screen within this component here. So I'm displaying this user's profile data based on this data coming in from the server. And let's see what that happens. So let's refresh the page and just send the request. As you can see, is what once I accept the request right now, what we see is what we see right now. We simply, sorry, not this. Let me just refresh this. Let me send the request once again so you guys can see it.
What's your point?
When I send the request, as you can see, what this piece of data, actually not this. Sorry, not this. That is this piece of those data would actually arrive if the driver has accepted the request. So let's do that once more. By the way, this data coming in from the clients is based on the logged in user. So let's send the request and accept the request. So right now the username is what? John, and the drop location is what? Cafeteria, and the driver's name is what? Brad2Q, and the role of the driver is what? Is a driver. So these are the data coming in from the client. By the way, you won't see any image here. An image is actually meant to be shown here, but because I'm actually not online, the image isn't shown here. So once you're online, this particular stuff, the image would get would actually displayed. So these are the data coming in from this server, which is being sent once a request is being made to this server. So we are simply displaying the username and their location, and we are displaying the what? Driver's name and their role itself. So you can simply do what? You can simply call the driver. If you are actually on a phone, this would actually work. But if you are on the browser will try to make, look at that. You can see what? Open, pick an app. So this is actually trying to open an app on your system, which is able to make a call. By the way, I don't have those sort of app on my system, so I'm actually going to cancel this. So this should actually work. So once we cancel the ride, it says what? Ride cancelled, by the way. And if the driver cancels the ride, it says what? Ride cancelled, by the way. So all this stuff are actually made possible through WebSockets. Like I said, this won't be possible if without WebSockets. If not, you won't be able to get those real-time data coming in from the server through WebSockets. So right now, as you can see, it says what? Accepted trips. How is this possible? Well, let's look at what is going on within the browser. So within the server. As soon as the user clicks on that accept ride, what happens right now is that, let's go into the driver's page. Let's go into let's look at this. I'm not sure if this is it. Not this. Actually, not this. Actually, so let's look at this. Let's look at the request page. The request. So once the user clicks, or sorry, once the driver clicks on accept request, what happens is that this piece of function gets executed. And let's look at what this piece of function does. So this piece of function is actually coming from a request component, coming in from the right. So let me show you how this works. So I'm simply sending this piece of data using props, and React, we have two ways of passing data around us or managing state. Number one is the props, is by sending it through what? Props, or in full form, property. So we simply send those data through props, or either using a state management library like Redux, or a base React API called Context API. But in this case, I'm simply sending those data using props. So I'm sending in all this data using props from the right component. So let's look at this. So let's look at request components here. So let's look at request component. Request components. Let me go back again and see what's happening. Request. Let's go into profile. Sorry. Let's check if this is actually declared here. I can't find a piece of components here. Okay, yeah, this is it. So in this case, I'm sending all this data using props. Number one, I'm sending in the from. That is where the user is coming from. I'm sending in their destination using to as a placeholder. Then the image, the user image, the socket ID, the reject right, this particular function which we'll discuss later on, and the accept request function which we'll discuss now. So what does this accept request function does? As soon as the driver accepts a particular request, this piece of function gets executed. So let's look at what this piece of function is. This is the piece of function here. This is the function here. So let's look at what this function does. Number one, as soon as the driver clicks on accept request or accept right, we simply emit an event to the server saying with the name of what? Right accepted. Right what? Accepted. So we simply emit this event coming in when we click that particular button, and we're simply sending different data. Number one, we're sending in the student socket ID, the driver socket ID, and the reason why we are sending their socket ID in order for the server to know who and who sent this piece of event here. And we're sending in the student ID, their driver ID, and their driver role. And let's look at what this does in the server. Let's look at this. Is this? I'm not sure this is it. Okay, yeah, this is it. So we are sending in a right accepted. So this is the piece of event here. We are sending in from the client as soon as the user, as the driver clicks on accept right. So what do we need to do? Number one, we simply need to check if data is available first, in order for me to do any other piece of logic within our application. So we simply destructure those data coming in from the client based on this particular parameter. So as we destructure those data coming in from the client, which is the students, all these are the data which we send as soon as the driver clicks on accept right request here. So once the driver clicks on the accept right request, we're sending in all this piece of information from the client here. From the client. So what we need to do elsewhere, I'm just comment out this. We simply check again. We simply get the driver's details from the database. And we make use of SQL query saying, hey you, database, I need you to give me this user's information based on their ID and their user role, which in this our case is the driver's ID and the driver's role, which is driver itself. So we are simply sending in we are simply telling the database to give us this piece of information based on the data sent from the client here. So we check if there's an error. If there's an error, we simply do what? We simply send the error to the client. If there's not error, we check if that particular user or if that particular driver exists in our database, because we don't want to send we don't want the user to get an empty driver's info. We want to send them a valid driver's information. So we simply check if that particular event, if that particular user is actually is found in our database, and we can do this using the results got from this particular piece of query. And the piece of query contains this piece of results contains a row count and the rows. The rows is actually contains the user's information found in the database, while the row count we actually contains the numbers of items found for this piece of the query we are making. So if this particular user exists, the row count will be 1. If the user doesn't exist, the row count will be what? 0. So we are checking if the user exists based on their row count. So we simply say, hey, if they don't exist, we are emitting an event to the client saying, write I think this is wrong. Okay, yeah, write accepted event here. So we are simply emitting this piece of event to the client with a message saying what? No driver found. Then we simply insert the student and the driver ID to trips table. This will be, I think this is wrong. I think I meant to do this earlier on, not this is meant I think this is meant for the other table itself, so I won't really go over it because this is actually not used in this particular project here. So we simply get those data from the client, sorry, from this piece of query. Then we send those data to our client with an event. We send this data to the student with what's right accepted. Now let me show you how this works. We have the drivers here, the what driver, and we have the what, sorry about my drawing, we have the what, we have the students here. So now once the student sends a request, let's say the student sends a write request, an event is being thrown to the what server. Let's say this is our server right now. Come on. Let's just call it our server. The event is being thrown from server. So the event is what is student write requests. We send this piece of event to the server using WebSockets. Then the server makes I think not this way. Let me just do it this way. Let me put the server here. Then we have the driver, then the students here. So the students send a write event to the server here. The server in turn, let's say write event to the what server. The server in turn sends a write accepted event to the student and the what. Sorry, the server. Sorry, not this. The server sent a write request to the driver, waiting for the driver to accept or deny the request. So it was write accepted event here. If the driver in turn, if this driver rejects or accepts the request, so let's say the driver accepts the request, a accepted event is being sent to the server with the driver details, which is the driver ID and the user role. So simply the server simply processes those data and send the request back to the client, so to the students. It sends a driver request back to the students, and the server also sends a student request, a student data to the driver. So instead of displaying the driver information within the driver's profile page, we are displaying the student's information within the driver's profile page here. So we are displaying the driver's information within the student's profile page here. So let me get that straight once again. So we are displaying the student information in the driver's profile page, and we are displaying the word driver's information within the student profile page. That was the reason why you were able to see this. Let's look at this. Let me refresh this and refresh this also. So as soon as we accept the request, we simply will display the student information. Let me clear all this. We simply display the student information in the driver's page, and we display the driver's information in the student page. Hope you guys get that clearly. As soon as the request is being accepted by the driver, we are displaying the student's information we are displaying the student information in the driver's profile page. We also displaying the driver's information in the student's page. So hope that's clear. Let's look at this right away. So we're simply saying a right accepted event. A right accepted event. We're emitting this. As I see now, this piece of logic is different from the one we did before. The one we did earlier is what io.emit. But now we are making use of io.to student socket ID, which means we are sending this piece of data. We are sending in the driver's information to the student socket ID instead of the driver's socket ID. Hope you guys get that clear. We are sending in this piece of information to the student socket ID, and once we send this piece of information to the student socket ID, we want to get those data from the client. And how do we do that? We simply get those piece of data from these events here coming in. And let's look at this event, which is not here. Let's look at the right event. Is it here? Not here. Let's go into the profile. Let's look at the profile first. It should be here. Things. Let me search for it. I can't find it. So let's say right accepted.
Just give me one more.
Let's look at this right here. Okay, yeah, it's actually found in the right page here. So we are listening for the events using socket.on and that particular event's name. And I told you that this particular event contains a callback function. The callback function will get executed as soon as this piece of information reaches the client here. So this callback function has a data parameter which contains the data which is being sent from the server, which in this our case is actually coming from the driver's information. So we are simply updating the states. We are simply updating the driver's detailed states, which is declared up here. We are updating the states based on this driver's information gotten from the socket here. We are simply setting loading to false and the right loading to true here. So when we do all this, we simply want to display the driver's information within our students page here, and the student information within our driver's page here. So that's what is happening behind the scene between the driver and the students. So now let's count down. Once this countdown reaches 0, we simply emit an event of ride cancel. See it here, it says no driver found. So let's look at that. Let's look at where this is coming from. It should be coming from the profile page here. So let's look at this from the driver's components. Where are you? Let me just search for it. Driver. So right here. So this is it here. So we're simply displaying a timer component within the driver's information here. So if we go into our driver's details here, we're displaying a timer. Let's look at this. Where is this declared? Let's look at timer. here. So we're displaying a countdown timer within this particular page here, within the request page. So as soon as this countdown counts from 10 to 0, we know that what the no driver accepted the trip. So in this case, we are simply showing an error or a message to the user saying no driver accepted this particular trip, or no driver was found here. So the way we do this countdown is that we make use of use effect hook. Like I said before, use effect hook is will actually get called as soon as the page gets rendered. That is, as the page gets loaded, as all these components get rendered from within the browser here. So we simply set a set interval using JavaScript. The JavaScript set interval is actually used for as you can see here, it says what. Let me look at this. Let me show you this. I don't think it should be here. Let me show you this from the data screen here. So let's look at what we are looking for set interval. Where are you? Click the timing, yeah. So let me look at this. So like I said, it says the timing event. The window object allows execution of code at specific time intervals. These time intervals are called timing events. The two key methods to use with JavaScript are what? Set timeout, which will execute a function after waiting a specified number of milliseconds, while the set interval what repeats the execution of function continuously. So if you want to repeat a piece of code continuously, like we want to increment a piece of code continuously, we can make use of the set interval. So let's look at a demonstration. So let's say I detect a variable called count, which is what 0, and I want to count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 all the way up to 10. I can simply call a set interval, which takes in a function here. Then it takes in a function, and it takes in also the number of time we want this to run. In this case, I want it to run for about 1 second. Every second, we want to increment this count here. So let's look at this. Let's say I want to increment this count from 1 to what 0. So I can simply say count plus or what count plus equals to what 1. Then I want to show the value of count. Now as soon as I run this piece of code here, I can simply say run this code. Now what this is, as I can see right here, the count is actually increasing from 1 all the way up to infinity. So I can simply do all this. We can also do the opposite of this by decrementing the count. So the way we decrement a number in JavaScript is by making use of the instead of to make use of plus equals to, we are simply increment this plus equals operator in JavaScript simply increments a piece of variable having an integer. So to decrement a piece of variable, we can simply do a what minus equal to and log it out here. So it says what -1. In this way, this won't work. Because right now you are seeing -1 and so on. But let's say this value was 10, and we want to decrement all the way up to 10. So let's say once the value reaches 10, we want to stop the timer. And the way to stop this particular timer is by assigning a variable to this particular timer. So let's say timer is equal to this. So we want to say if this particular variable, this count here, which is this, if this count is what greater or equals to what is greater than or equal to what 10, we want to do what we want to clear. I want to stop the timer, and the only way to stop an interval or set interval is by making use of what clear interval. In this way, we are simply clearing whatever interval which the browser has already. The clear interval takes in the timer or the set interval variable here. So in this case, it's called what timer here, because that was what we assigned the value to, and then we simply called close it here. So let's do this. So 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Right now this won't work because why? It isn't greater than what 10. Let's let's refactor our code right here. Instead of greater than equals to 10, we can simply say greater than equals to what? If it is less than or equals to 0, not 10, sorry. And let's run our code again. So 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Why didn't it work? And the reason why it stops is because of what? That particular function called clear interval. So we're simply checking if actually this count variable is less than or equal to 0. Right now it's actually equal to 0. That was the reason why the what clear interval function was called. So that was what we are that's what we're actually doing here within this piece of code. We are simply updating this count here. We are decrementing the count using a particular function called set seconds, and we're checking if the seconds is equals to what? 0. Then we simply do what? Emit an event to the server saying what? No driver responded. Then we simply emit the driver's ID and the driver's ID in this case. Oh, sorry, the student ID. So when we do this, we simply clear the interval. We clear the interval by calling clear interval on this piece of variable here, which is the timer. Then we return this cleanup function in React. This you won't get this right now until you've gone to make your own personal research on this particular piece of topic. But let's see what this particular event does in the server. Remember, we are emitting an event to the server based on this particular interval. So if the interval is equal to 0, if the timer has reduced to 0, we want to emit an event to the server saying what? No response. So let's go into the server here. Right now, let's look at that. Let's comment out this. Let's close this. This is the event here. So we're just checking the server and saying, hey, if there's a socket event called no response, what do we need to do? In this case, we are sending it to that piece of we are emitting this data to that particular ID which was sent from the client and we are sending in an event called write cancel followed by the data itself. So let's go back to our server here, to our client. Sorry, we send that piece of events. So we send that piece of event from this server. Then let's go into the right. So we check if let's look at this right here. We check if this particular stuff was declared. We simply we simply set we simply emit a data again to the server and with this same event displaying a message saying I'm sorry, not this, this. So we check for if there's an event called no driver. There's an event no driver. If this particular socket event exists, we simply update the state with the message sent from the server. So let's look at this again one more time. This is the server here. Sorry, not this color. This is the server here. And this is the driver page. This is the student page here. So as soon as the driver doesn't respond, as soon as that count is less than or equals to 0 and an event is being sent to the server based on those data, then the server in turn sends those events back to the student page instead of the driver saying what the no driver responded. So let's look at how that is possible. Let's just clean up this. So let's look at this right one more time. So let's watch. As soon as this counts down reduced to 0, an event is being sent to the server and then to the client. It says what? Know what driver was found. No driver responded either. So that's what goes on behind the scenes of this particular two parties between the client and the server. When students request a ride from their page. So hope you guys get this. The other is just the rest is just the basic. And let me show you how we're able to update the profile. So right now, a user and a driver can actually update their profile and their stuff based on their information. So let's look at this. Something's wrong with the CSS or so. I don't know what's wrong with this. Let's look at edit profile, right? Look at edit profile component or page rather.
Nothing scary here.
So how did you get the nickname Champ?
It's not a weekend.
Is your
Sorry?
real name, or is it short for something?
My full name's Champion.
Your actual name's Champion.
Where are you?
Sorry.
My dad. Water belongs back to my
Where are you? Where are you? Let's go into our profile page and see where that's coming from. Edit from here. The edit form is coming from.
You know, if you're scared, I can.
It's coming from where?
Wait, it's okay. It's just a statue. Are you fine? Sorry.
Edit form is coming in from. Has a name what edit user model. So let's look at let's look for that.
You're free to go.
Don't know where this particular stuff is coming. Where it says it's coming from actually. I think we must have wrote it somewhere else. It should be okay. Yeah, it's down here. So let's just do something. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Not 70% rather, but 350 pixels. Just to make it like this. Let's do it 450 pixels. Okay, yeah, this is normal. Or let's do it 400 pixels. Sorry about that. It's too wide. Yeah, it should be normal now. So let's look at the way this works. So when we click on edit profile, a modals pop up, and when we declare this modal, it's coming in from the profile page here. We simply wrote these components separately, and we actually update the states based on a specific event which was clicked. So let's close all this. Let's close all this. Edit for this piece here. So as soon as we click on this particular edit modal, we simply update the state, and this edit state here, right here, it's coming in from this up here. This. So this will tell once this particular variable is true, we want to show a modal based on the form for the user to edit their details. So the user can either edit their profile details and somebody else. So let's say it's on 2.0, and when we make request to the server gets this piece of data and updates the database. So let's see what's going on within this server. So let's look at this. It should be here. Edit profile. Yeah, this. So once we do all this, we simply get the data coming from the server, so from the client, and then we simply update their data. We make use of the SQL query syntax called update users table, which is the table found in the database, and followed by set. The set allows us to add a particular value to piece of column in our database. So you can simply update that piece of column based on the data which was sent from the client itself. So once I click on once I update this from John to John 2.0, I can click on save changes, and what it says your profile info updated, and what is this John 2.0 updated. So the way this works is that this is the server here, and this is the client here. As soon as the request is being sent to the client, the server here, the server processes data followed by data which the user sends from the client here, and the server in turn, whatever logic has been placed upon it, simply updates those pieces of data, then sends a request to the client, which is being displayed as either a success or a failure. And let's just
There you are.
clear this.
You okay? You look like you just saw a ghost.
So as soon as the data got
Okay,
updated,
come on, tell the decorator.
the way we handle it in the client is that as soon as this piece of information gets updated, so by the way, we are sending in those data with this particular API here, this URL based on the server. So we are simply making it a fetch function which is provided by the browser to make requests to the server from the client. So we simply send the user ID, the role, the profile details. The profile details contains the information here. So let's look at this. We simply update the profile. Then once the profile gets updated, we simply do what again? We reload the page and update those information within the browser's local storage, which you are actually seeing here. Then, as you can see, the user can either log out, home request right, and home go to the home page. How the logout works is that because right now a piece of authentication has been set for this in order for it to work. So the way this works is that a piece of, let me just show you guys. Let's go into this. So this particular function, this method in this class here is logged in, checks if actually a Babcock alt token, data is available in the browser's local storage, and we assign the value to this particular tokens, and we are checking if there is no tokens, and the tokens, the refresh token is equals to an empty string, or the tokens on access token is equals to an empty string. And by the way, let me show you where all this is coming from here. So if we go into our browser here, I'm going to the application tab here. You can see these tokens here. Number one, the access token and the what refresh token. So we are checking if these two are empty, because this is what we need for making our server recognize who we are. So we check if these tokens are unavailable. If they are unavailable, we simply return what? False, which means the user isn't logged in. So as we try and catch, we simply try and we get the data coming from the we simply decode the token coming from the local storage. The token itself has a piece of information within it. It has an expiring date, the user information also. So we simply destructure out the expiring date. So let me show you how this works. This is the token. The token has a piece of information like this. It has the access token, it has the refresh token, and other piece of data here. So instead of us doing t token dot access token or token dot refresh token, we simply destructure all this data coming in from the browser local storage using JavaScript destructuring method. So we simply say let token is equals, not this, we simply destructure the data like this. Say let's say let expiring dates, which is found in the token, is equals to whatever refresh token itself. This is how we destructure things from with JavaScript in an object. So But when we destroy this particular stuff, and we simply convert the browsers or your PC dates to milliseconds. So normally to seconds. Normally the dates within your PC is rendered in milliseconds. So we simply convert it using milliseconds, using new dates to get them divided by 1000, which we convert it into seconds. Then we check if the expiring date is less than the normal date which we have, which means if the expiring date which is set by the time these are logged in, if it is less than the normal date of your PC, we know that what the user has logged out. So we simply return false. Else we return true. If an error occurs, we simply return false. And how we check that out is we go into auth here. We simply say, hey, if the user is logged in, we simply display home component. Else we display sign up page here. If the user is logged in, we display home or sign in. If the user is logged in, we display profile or sign. If the user is logged in, we display write instead of sign up. If they're not logged in, we simply display sign up, sign in, and all this other stuff here. So let's look at this. Once we click on logout, we simply all this stuff returns false. This returns false because why? This data won't be available in the browser again, because once it's not available, we simply know that the user hasn't been logged in. So we simply redirect them to the sign-in page. So let's look at it. Once we click on logout, we clear the data in our browser and do what? Redirect this. As you can see here, those data isn't found except the socket ID here. We simply clear out those data from the browser and we direct the user back to the login to the sign-in screen. And that's it for this particular piece of application. I hope you guys get it. If you need any reference to learn any of this which I've done here, you can simply send me some message in my inbox here. And that's it for this course. Thank you.